I was debugging code at my desk when the courier walked into our Phoenix office that Tuesday morning. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands, and when I tore it open, my world collapsed. Court papers. My own parents were suing me for theft of family property over the house I had bought with my life savings. The legal document claimed I had stolen money that rightfully belonged to my sister Emma for purchasing a home. I read the words 3 times before they sank in. Robert and Linda Martinez versus Benjamin Martinez. My own family had taken me to court, demanding I surrender the house I had worked 3 years to afford. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, and I realized my American dream had become my worst nightmare. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, I learned early that love in the Martinez household was distributed unevenly. Emma, my younger sister by 2 years, could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. While I delivered newspapers at 13 to save for a bicycle, Emma received a brand new Trek mountain bike for her birthday. When high school graduation came, Emma got a gleaming Honda Civic while I rode the city bus to my job at a local grocery store. Our father Robert ran a successful insurance brokerage, and our mother Linda worked as a real estate agent for one of the top firms in Scottsdale. Money was never tight, but it always seemed to flow in Emma's direction. College tuition, sorority fees, spring break trips to Cancun, designer clothes, frequent dinners at expensive restaurants. Emma lived like a princess while I worked my way through Arizona State University, juggling classes with shifts at 3 different part-time jobs. I remember the night Emma called home crying because she needed $800 for car repairs. Dad wired the money within an hour. When my laptop crashed during finals week junior year, I was told the family budget was stretched thin and I would need to figure it out myself. I spent that entire weekend at the library, writing my final papers on the public computers. After graduation, Emma moved into a luxury apartment in downtown Phoenix. Mom and Dad covered the security deposit, first month's rent, and bought her a complete furniture set from Pottery Barn. When I graduated with my computer science degree, I received a handshake and a $50 gift card to Best Buy. I moved into a studio apartment in Tempe, furnished it with items from garage sales, and started my career as a software engineer at a growing tech startup. For 3 years, I lived like a monk. Every dollar I earned went toward one goal: buying my own house. I drove a 15-year-old Toyota Corolla, held together with duct tape and prayer. My entertainment budget consisted of free movies in the park and dollar tacos on Tuesday nights. I shopped at discount grocery stores, bought generic brands, and wore the same 5 work shirts in rotation. My coworkers thought I was crazy for living so frugally, but I had a vision of the life I wanted to build. The house hunting process took 6 months. I looked at dozens of properties, each one representing a different version of my future. Finally, I found it. A 1920s craftsman bungalow in a quiet Tempe neighborhood, 3 blocks from the university. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, hardwood floors, and a front porch perfect for morning coffee. The asking price was $325,000. I had saved $65,000 for the down payment, enough to avoid private mortgage insurance and secure a reasonable interest rate. The day I signed the purchase agreement, I felt like I was signing my Declaration of Independence. This house would be mine, earned through my own sweat and sacrifice. The closing process took 30 days that felt like 30 years. I walked through the empty rooms, measuring for furniture and planning renovations. I researched the neighborhood history, learned about the local schools, and imagined the life I would build within those walls. When I finally received the keys on a sunny Friday afternoon in March, I sat on the front steps and called my parents to share the good news. "Mom, I did it. I bought the house." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "Benny, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight?" Something in her tone made my stomach clench, but I was too excited to pay attention to the warning signs. "Sure, I want to show you the photos anyway." That evening, I drove to my childhood home in the Ahwatukee suburbs, expecting congratulations and maybe even a bottle of champagne. Instead, I found my parents and Emma waiting in the living room with expressions I had never seen before. "Sit down, son," Dad said, his insurance broker voice replacing his father voice. Mom twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I remembered from childhood. "Benny, there's been a misunderstanding about your house purchase." "What kind of misunderstanding?" Emma spoke for the first time, her voice shaky with what I initially mistook for emotion. "That money you used for the down payment, it wasn't really yours." The room began to spin. "What are you talking about?" Dad pulled out a folder I had not noticed before. "When your grandfather Joe passed away last year, he left specific instructions about his savings. That money was designated for Emma to buy her first home." "That's impossible. Grandpa Joe's estate was settled months ago." "I was at the reading of the will." Mom leaned forward, her real estate training evident in her measured tone. "The will only covered his major assets. There was additional money, a separate savings account, that he intended for Emma's future home purchase. You've been living off money that belongs to your sister." My hands started shaking. "I earned every penny of my down payment. I have bank statements, pay stubs, tax returns, 3 years of documentation." "We know you worked hard," Emma said, tears now flowing freely, "but somehow that inheritance money got mixed up with your savings. We need you to sell the house and return what rightfully belongs to me." The conversation that followed lasted 4 hours. I showed them my financial records on my phone, explaining every deposit, every transfer, every dollar I had saved. I walked them through my budgets, my sacrifices, my methodical approach to home ownership. Nothing I said seemed to penetrate their conviction that I had somehow stolen Emma's inheritance. "We hoped you would do the right thing voluntarily," Dad finally said as the evening wound down. "But if you force our hand, we will take legal action to recover Emma's property." I drove home that night in a daze, the celebration dinner I had planned forgotten. As I unlocked the door to my craftsman bungalow, the house that had represented freedom and achievement now felt like a fortress under siege. I spent the weekend going through every financial document I owned, searching for any connection to Grandpa Joe's estate. There was none, because I had never received a single dollar of inheritance money. Monday morning brought another shock. A registered letter waited in my mailbox, postmarked 3 days earlier. Inside was a formal legal notice from the law offices of Winters, Caldwell, and Associates. My parents had retained an attorney and were demanding I cease all activities related to the property pending resolution of their ownership claim. That was the moment I realized my family was serious about destroying my life to give Emma everything she wanted. Again. The law offices of Thompson and Associates occupied a modest building in central Phoenix, a stark contrast to the glass tower where my parents' attorney worked. Marcus Thompson, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, listened to my story with the patient attention of someone who had seen every kind of family dispute imaginable. "Your parents are claiming you used inheritance funds that belonged to your sister," he summarized after reviewing their filing. "They're seeking immediate return of the property plus damages for wrongful possession." I spread my financial documents across his conference table, like evidence at a crime scene. "Here's every bank statement for the past 3 years. Every pay stub, every tax return, every investment account. Show me $1 that came from any inheritance." Marcus studied the papers with professional thoroughness. "Your documentation looks solid, but family court cases can be complex. They're claiming your grandfather left specific funds for your sister's home purchase through a separate arrangement that wasn't included in the formal estate proceedings." "What kind of arrangement?" "They've provided what appears to be a handwritten note from your grandfather, stating his intention to leave his savings account to Emma for purchasing a house. They also have bank records showing transfers between family accounts that they claim support their version." The room felt like it was closing in. "Can they really take my house?" "If they can prove their claim, yes. But we'll fight this every step of the way. First, we need to request discovery on all family financial records. If there's something fishy about their story, we'll find it." The legal process moved with agonizing slowness. Discovery requests were filed, depositions scheduled, expert witnesses retained. My savings account, carefully built over 3 years, began draining at an alarming rate. Marcus charged $250 per hour, and family litigation was notoriously time-consuming. My work life suffered as court dates and attorney meetings interrupted my schedule. My colleagues at the tech startup tried to be supportive, but explaining that your own parents were suing you for your house felt surreal even to me. How do you concentrate on debugging software when your family is trying to destroy your financial future? Emma's deposition was scheduled for a Thursday morning in downtown Phoenix. I sat beside Marcus in the sterile conference room, watching my sister swear to tell the truth about events I knew she was fabricating. She wore a conservative blue dress that made her look younger and more vulnerable, her eyes red-rimmed from what appeared to be hours of crying. Emma, can you explain your understanding of your grandfather's intentions regarding his savings? Patricia Winters, my parents' attorney, led her through carefully rehearsed answers. Grandpa Joe always talked about helping me buy a house someday. He said his generation believed in homeownership as the foundation of the American dream, and he wanted to make sure I had that opportunity. Emma's voice trembled with apparent emotion. He told me multiple times that his savings account was my house fund for when I was ready to settle down. Did he put this intention in writing? Emma reached into her purse and produced a folded piece of notebook paper. He wrote me this note about 6 months before he passed away. I leaned forward to read the handwriting I had known since childhood. The note, written in Grandpa Joe's shaky script, clearly stated that his savings account at Desert Community Bank was intended for Emma's first home purchase. The paper looked aged, yellowed around the edges, with fold marks suggesting it had been kept in a wallet or purse for months. Marcus made notes furiously as Emma continued her testimony. When I learned that Benny had used that money to buy a house for himself, I was devastated. Grandpa Joe specifically wanted to help me achieve homeownership, and somehow those funds ended up in the wrong hands. How do you believe the money was transferred? I don't know the details. Banking errors happen. Accounts get confused. All I know is that the money Grandpa Joe saved for my future is now tied up in a house that was supposed to be mine. My turn came after the lunch break. Patricia Winters approached me with the demeanor of a prosecutor facing a convicted criminal. Mr. Martinez, are you claiming you had no knowledge of your grandfather's specific intentions regarding his savings account? My grandfather never mentioned leaving money for anyone's house purchase. His estate was handled by his attorney. Everything went through probate, and I received no inheritance money whatsoever. Yet you admit to having unusually large savings for someone your age and income level. Because I lived frugally for 3 years specifically to save for a house, I can document every dollar. Isn't it possible that inheritance funds somehow became mixed with your personal savings without your knowledge? No. I track every transaction in my accounts. I use budgeting software. I reconcile my statements monthly. I keep receipts for major purchases. If someone had deposited $25,000 into my account, I would have noticed. The deposition continued for 3 hours, with Patricia Winters trying every angle to suggest I had knowingly or unknowingly used Emma's inheritance money. By the time I left the law office that evening, I felt like I had been run through a meat grinder. The financial strain was becoming unbearable. Between legal fees and my mortgage payment, I was burning through my emergency fund rapidly. I took a second job doing freelance web development on weekends, working 16-hour days to stay afloat. My social life disappeared completely, as every spare moment was consumed by legal preparation or extra work to pay for the legal preparation. My parents had cut off all communication, treating me like a criminal who had stolen from the family. Extended relatives began choosing sides based on incomplete information, and I found myself uninvited from family gatherings I had attended my entire life. The isolation was almost worse than the financial pressure. 6 weeks into the legal battle, Patricia Winters filed a motion for preliminary injunction, to prevent me from making any modifications to the house or selling it while the case was pending. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning, and I took my first sick day in 2 years to attend. Judge Barbara Chen presided over family court with no-nonsense efficiency. She reviewed the preliminary evidence with speed that suggested this was routine business for her. The plaintiffs are seeking to prevent any changes to the property pending resolution of their ownership claim, she announced, after reviewing the motions. Given the complexity of the financial allegations, I'm granting the preliminary injunction. Mr. Martinez, you may continue living in the house, but no renovations, no sale, and no refinancing until this matter is resolved. I felt the walls of my craftsman bungalow becoming the walls of a prison. The house I had worked so hard to buy was now tied up in legal limbo, and I was powerless to do anything about it. That evening, Marcus called with news that made my stomach drop. They've escalated their demands. Patricia Winters filed an amended complaint, seeking not just return of the property, but punitive damages for wrongful possession. They're claiming you've been living rent-free in what amounts to Emma's house, and they want compensation for fair market rental value. How much are they talking about? 18 months of occupancy at market rates for your neighborhood. Roughly $27,000 on top of the property value. I hung up the phone and walked through my house, looking at the hardwood floors I had refinished, the kitchen where I cooked my simple meals, the bedroom where I lay awake at night, worrying about losing everything I had worked for. How had my family decided that destroying my life was preferable to accepting that I had achieved something on my own? The answer came 3 days later, when Emma produced what appeared to be the smoking gun that would destroy my defense entirely. Marcus Thompson's voice was grim when he called me at work on Monday morning. We have a problem. Emma's attorney has provided additional evidence that significantly strengthens their case. I stepped into an empty conference room, my hands already trembling. What kind of evidence? A handwritten note from your grandfather, dated 8 months before his death, specifically leaving his savings account at Desert Community Bank to Emma for home purchase. It's more detailed than the first note, includes account numbers, and appears to be properly witnessed. The floor felt like it was dissolving beneath my feet. That's impossible. The handwriting analysis we ordered shows consistency with your grandfather's known writing samples. Unless we can prove this document was fabricated, it's going to be very difficult to defend your position. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, mechanically fixing bugs and attending meetings, while my mind raced through possibilities. That evening, I called Marcus with a request that felt desperate even to me. I want to investigate my family's financial history more thoroughly. Something about this doesn't add up, and I need to understand what really happened with Grandpa Joe's money. That kind of investigation gets expensive quickly. Are you sure you want to go down that road? I'm sure. If Emma has a legitimate claim to inheritance money, I need to know. But if she doesn't, I'm not going to let my family steal my house through fraud. Marcus recommended a forensic accountant named David Park, who specialized in family financial disputes. Our first meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at his office in Scottsdale. David was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with the intense focus of someone who loved solving financial puzzles. Family money disputes are often about more than inheritance, he explained as we reviewed my case file. There are usually underlying financial pressures that motivate people to make claims they know are questionable. What kind of pressures? Debt, business failures, medical expenses, lifestyle inflation. People get desperate and start looking for money anywhere they can find it. Tell me about your family's financial situation. I realized I knew very little about my parents' actual financial health. Dad runs an insurance agency. Mom sells real estate. They live in a nice house in Ahwatukee, drive new cars, take vacations. They seem comfortable. Seem is the operative word. Let's start with your grandfather's estate and work backward from there. David's investigation began with public records. Grandpa Joe's will was filed with the Maricopa County Courthouse. and the probate proceedings were documented in detail. What we found was troubling. Your grandfather's estate was much smaller than your family has been claiming, David explained after 3 days of research. At the time of his death, he had approximately $47,000 in total assets. Medical bills and final expenses consumed most of that amount. But Emma's inheritance claim is for much more than that. Exactly. She's claiming entitlement to funds that apparently didn't exist in your grandfather's estate. Either there's money we haven't found, or someone is making claims about inheritance that can't be supported. David's next step was investigating my parents' financial history. Credit reports, property records, business filings, and tax liens painted a picture I had never suspected. Your father's insurance business has been struggling for the past 2 years, David reported during our second meeting. Commercial insurance is highly competitive, and several major clients have switched to larger firms. His revenue is down 37% from its peak. He never mentioned business problems. People often hide financial stress from family members. But there's more. Your parents took a second mortgage on their house 18 months ago, and they've borrowed against Robert's life insurance policy. They're carrying significant debt. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My parents, who had always seemed financially stable, were apparently struggling to maintain their lifestyle. What about Emma? David's expression darkened. That's where things get really interesting. Your sister has serious financial problems that go beyond normal young adult debt. He produced a folder thick with credit reports and bank statements. Emma has $17,000 in credit card debt across 6 different cards. She's been making minimum payments for the past 8 months, and several accounts are approaching default status. $17,000? How is that possible? Gaming and entertainment expenses, mostly. Frequent trips to Las Vegas, online gambling accounts, luxury purchases. She's been living far above her means for at least 2 years. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture I didn't want to see. My family wasn't pursuing a legitimate inheritance claim. They were desperately scrambling for money to solve multiple financial crises. David, I need you to dig deeper into Grandpa Joe's final months. If Emma's inheritance story is fabricated, there has to be evidence somewhere. The investigation took another week and led us to Harold Brennan, Grandpa Joe's longtime accountant. Harold had retired 6 months after Grandpa Joe's death, but he agreed to meet with us at a coffee shop in Scottsdale. Harold was a thin man in his 70s, with the careful demeanor of someone who had spent decades handling other people's money. When David explained the inheritance dispute, Harold's expression grew uncomfortable. I handled Joe's books for 15 years, he said quietly. There was never any separate savings account designated for family gifts. Joe was careful with his money, but he wasn't wealthy. The medical bills from his final illness consumed most of his savings. What about the bank statements that show large transfers between family accounts? David asked. Harold's discomfort increased visibly. I can't speak to what happened in Joe's final months. Linda had power of attorney over his finances during that period. The revelation sent a chill through me. My mother had legal control over Grandpa Joe's money during his final illness, and now she was claiming that money had been designated for Emma's inheritance. Harold, is there anything else you think we should know? The old accountant looked around the coffee shop nervously before leaning forward. Joe started showing signs of confusion in his last year. Memory problems, difficulty making decisions. Linda was helping him manage his affairs, which seemed appropriate at the time. But looking back, he trailed off, but the implication was clear. If Grandpa Joe was experiencing cognitive decline, any financial decisions made during that period could be questionable. David and I left the coffee shop with a new direction for our investigation. We needed to examine the medical records from Grandpa Joe's final months and scrutinize every financial transaction that occurred while Mom had power of attorney. The medical records painted a devastating picture. Grandpa Joe had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia 8 months before his death, but the family had kept this information private. During the exact period when Emma's inheritance note was supposedly written, Medical documentation showed Grandpa Joe was experiencing significant cognitive impairment. "This changes everything," Marcus said when we presented our findings. "If your grandfather was mentally incompetent when these alleged inheritance instructions were written, any documents from that period are legally meaningless." But David's forensic accounting uncovered something even more damaging to Emma's case. Bank surveillance footage from Desert Community Bank, which was routinely retained for 18 months, showed my mother making multiple large withdrawals from Grandpa Joe's accounts during his final 3 months. The transactions totaled nearly $30,000, money that was never accounted for in the estate proceedings. "Your mother was systematically draining your grandfather's accounts," David explained grimly. "The money Emma claims was her inheritance appears to have been taken by Linda before your grandfather's death." The investigation was revealing a web of financial manipulation that went far deeper than a simple inheritance dispute. My family wasn't just wrong about the money, they were potentially guilty of elder financial abuse. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. The private investigator Marcus recommended was a former Phoenix police detective named Janet Rodriguez. Her small office in a strip mall near the airport was lined with filing cabinets and computer equipment that suggested she took her work seriously. Family financial fraud cases often involve patterns of deception that go beyond the primary dispute, Janet explained. During our initial consultation, "If your sister and parents are fabricating inheritance claims, there are probably other questionable financial activities we can uncover." Janet's investigation began with Emma's lifestyle and spending patterns. What she discovered over the next 2 weeks was far worse than David's financial analysis had revealed. "Your sister has a serious gambling problem," Janet reported matter-of-factly. "She's a regular at 3 different casinos between Phoenix and Las Vegas, and she's been banned from blackjack tables at 2 of them for erratic behavior." The surveillance photos Janet had obtained showed Emma at casino gaming tables with stacks of chips, her face displaying the intense focus of someone for whom gambling had become compulsion rather than entertainment. "But this is bigger than personal addiction," Janet continued. "Emma owes money to people who aren't banks or credit card companies." The investigation had uncovered connections to illegal gambling operations that operated out of seemingly legitimate businesses throughout the Phoenix area. Emma had accumulated debts to loan sharks, who charged interest rates that could cripple someone financially within months. "How much does she owe to these people?" "At least $40,000, based on what I've been able to document. But it could be significantly more." The revelation explained everything about my family's desperate legal action. Emma wasn't just facing credit card debt and lifestyle inflation. She was in debt to dangerous people who expected payment, regardless of her ability to provide it. "Janet, I need you to keep digging. If my parents know about Emma's gambling debts, that gives them motive for fabricating inheritance claims." The investigation expanded to include surveillance of my parents' activities and deeper research into their financial transactions. What Janet discovered painted a picture of a family in complete financial freefall. "Your parents have been covering Emma's gambling debts for at least 8 months, Janet reported during our 3rd meeting. "Robert has liquidated his retirement accounts and borrowed against every asset they own. They're facing foreclosure on their house within 60 days. The foreclosure proceedings were a matter of public record, filed 2 weeks earlier in Maricopa County Superior Court. My parents, who had always seemed financially stable, were about to lose their home because they had drained their savings to enable Emma's gambling addiction." "This gets worse," Janet continued. "I've been monitoring Emma's activities, and she's been bragging to people about manipulating your parents into filing the lawsuit." Janet produced audio recordings from a surveillance device she had placed in a restaurant where Emma frequently met friends. The conversations were damning. "I told Mom and Dad that Grandpa Joe left me money for a house, and they totally bought it." Emma's voice was clear on the recording. "All I had to do was cry a little and act like Benny stole my inheritance. Now they're paying for lawyers to get me that house." "But didn't your grandfather actually leave you money?" one of Emma's friends asked. Emma's laughter was bitter and cold. Grandpa Joe barely had enough money to pay for his nursing home. But Mom's been moving money around from his accounts, so it looks like there was inheritance money that got mixed up somehow. She's good at making numbers work when she needs to. The recording continued with Emma describing her plans for the house once she obtained it through the lawsuit. She intended to sell it immediately and use the proceeds to pay off her gambling debts and fund a move to Las Vegas, where she believed she could make money through professional gambling. Once I get that house from Benny, I'm done with Phoenix. Vegas has better action, and I won't have family breathing down my neck about my spending. Marcus listened to the recordings with the grim satisfaction of an attorney who had just been handed a winning case. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, potentially elder abuse, and definitely perjury. Emma has committed multiple felonies, and your parents are accessories. But Janet's investigation uncovered one final piece of evidence that completed the picture of my family's deception. The handwritten note Emma had produced as evidence of Grandpa Joe's inheritance intentions was forensically examined by a documents expert Janet employed. The note was written after your grandfather's death, Janet announced during our final meeting. The ink analysis shows it was created using a pen that wasn't manufactured until 3 months after Joe passed away. The evidence was overwhelming. Emma had forged the inheritance note. My mother had stolen money from Grandpa Joe's accounts during his mental incompetency, and my parents had filed a fraudulent lawsuit to cover up their financial crimes and enable Emma's gambling addiction. There's one more thing, Janet said as she prepared to leave. Emma's boyfriend, Tyler, is willing to testify against her. He's facing drug charges in an unrelated case, and his attorney thinks cooperation in your lawsuit could help his situation. Tyler's statement, provided through his attorney, detailed Emma's extensive planning of the fraud. She had been discussing ways to manipulate inheritance claims for months before Grandpa Joe's death, and she had specifically targeted my house purchase as an opportunity to fabricate financial entitlement. Emma told me she could make it look like their grandfather left her money by moving stuff around in bank accounts, Tyler's statement read. She said her mom knew how to work the system because of her real estate background. The whole thing was Emma's idea from the beginning. Armed with forensic evidence, surveillance recordings, financial records, and witness testimony, Marcus filed our countersuit on a Friday morning in late September. We were seeking damages for fraud, defamation, emotional distress, and legal fees. Additionally, Marcus had contacted the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office regarding potential criminal charges for elder abuse and conspiracy. Your family opened this door when they decided to file a fraudulent lawsuit, Marcus explained as we reviewed our filing. Now they're going to face the consequences of their actions in both civil and criminal court. The media attention began almost immediately. Local news stations picked up the story of the family lawsuit that had escalated into criminal fraud allegations. The headline in the Arizona Republic read, "Phoenix family accused of elder abuse, in-house inheritance scam. Emma's gambling addiction, my parents' financial crisis, and the elaborate fraud they had constructed to steal my house became public knowledge throughout the Phoenix area." My phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, distant relatives, and former classmates who had seen the news coverage. But the most important call came from the district attorney's office on Monday morning. "Mr. Martinez, this is Prosecutor Angela Davis. We've reviewed the evidence in your case, and we're opening a criminal investigation into potential elder abuse and fraud charges against your family members. We'd like to schedule an interview at your earliest convenience." The criminal investigation moved with surprising speed. Emma was arrested on Tuesday for forging legal documents and conspiracy to commit fraud. My parents were taken into custody the following day for elder financial abuse and filing false legal claims. The local news covered their arrest with the same intensity they had devoted to the original lawsuit. Seeing my parents in handcuffs on the evening news was one of the most painful moments of my life, even though I knew they had brought it on themselves. Emma's first court appearance was scheduled for the following Monday. As I sat in the gallery watching my sister face criminal fraud charges, I realized that my family's attempt to steal my house had destroyed not just my trust, but their freedom as well. The judge set Emma's bail at $50,000, money my parents no longer possessed. She would remain in county jail pending trial, finally facing consequences for the gambling addiction and financial manipulation that had consumed her life for years. Justice was finally beginning to unfold, but I took no satisfaction in watching my family's complete destruction. The criminal charges against my family created a media firestorm that extended far beyond the Phoenix area. National news outlets picked up the story as an example of how elder abuse and family financial fraud were becoming increasingly common across the country. Marcus Thompson's strategy was methodical and devastating. Our civil countersuit laid out every piece of evidence we had gathered, creating a comprehensive picture of the conspiracy my family had constructed to steal my house. We're seeking full restitution for your legal fees, punitive damages for emotional distress, and compensation for the defamation you've suffered, Marcus explained as we prepared for the court hearings. Additionally, we're asking the court to issue a permanent injunction, preventing your family from making any future claims against your property. The first major hearing was scheduled for early October. Patricia Winters, my parents' attorney, had withdrawn from the case when the criminal fraud evidence emerged, leaving my family to scramble for new legal representation. Emma's new public defender, a harried-looking woman named Carol Peterson, attempted to negotiate a plea agreement that would minimize her client's criminal exposure. Ms. Martinez is willing to admit to forging the inheritance document in exchange for reduced charges and probation, Carol offered during a pre-trial conference. Prosecutor Angela Davis rejected the plea immediately. Your client committed multiple felonies over an extended period. The fraud was sophisticated and targeted vulnerable family members. The state is pursuing maximum penalties. My parents faced similar legal pressure. Their new attorney, a criminal defense lawyer named Michael Barnes, advised them that their best option was complete cooperation with authorities and full restitution to victims. Robert and Linda are prepared to make complete financial disclosure and assist in recovering any funds that were improperly taken, Michael announced during their arraignment hearing. Judge Barbara Chen, who had presided over the original family court case, consolidated all proceedings under her jurisdiction to streamline the complex legal situation. This case has evolved from a civil family dispute into a serious criminal matter involving elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy, Judge Chen announced during the first combined hearing. I want all parties to understand that this court takes financial crimes against elderly family members very seriously. The evidence presentation began with David Park's forensic accounting analysis. His testimony methodically destroyed every aspect of Emma's inheritance claim, demonstrating through bank records and estate documents that no inheritance money had ever existed for her house purchase. The defendant systematically looted the victim's accounts during his period of mental incapacity, David testified. The total amount stolen was approximately $37,000, money that was then used to cover gambling debts and lifestyle expenses. Harold Brennan, Grandpa Joe's former accountant, testified about the family's financial manipulation during the final months of my grandfather's life. His testimony was particularly damaging because it established that my mother had used her power of attorney to steal from a mentally incompetent, elderly person. Linda Martinez had complete control over Joe's finances during his dementia, Harold testified. The withdrawals she made were not authorized by any estate planning documents and were not in Joe's best interests. Emma's boyfriend, Tyler, took the witness stand as part of his plea agreement in his own criminal case. His testimony provided insider details about how the fraud had been planned and executed. Emma talked about getting money from her family for months before she actually did it, Tyler testified. She said she could make it look like her grandfather owed her money by getting her mom to move stuff around in bank accounts. The whole lawsuit thing was her idea to pressure her brother into giving up his house. The most devastating testimony came from Janet Rodriguez, the private investigator who had documented Emma's gambling addiction and financial crimes. Her surveillance evidence showed the scope of Emma's deception and the desperation that had motivated the fraud. Emma Martinez knowingly fabricated inheritance claims to solve her gambling debt problems, Janet testified. She manipulated her parents into financing and filing fraudulent legal claims against her brother's legitimate property purchase. Emma's gambling addiction was exposed in detail during the court proceedings. Casino surveillance footage showed her erratic behavior at gaming tables, and financial records documented her pattern of borrowing money from increasingly dangerous sources. The defendant accumulated debts to illegal gambling operations that demanded payment regardless of her ability to provide it. Prosecutor Angela Davis explained to the court. This desperation motivated her to target her brother's house as a source of funds to satisfy her creditors. My own testimony focused on the emotional and financial damage the fraudulent lawsuit had caused. I described the stress of defending against false claims, the cost of legal representation, and the destruction of family relationships that had resulted from my relatives' criminal actions. I worked 3 years to save money for my house, I testified. My family knew exactly how hard I had worked and how much that home meant to me. They decided to destroy my financial security rather than face the consequences of Emma's gambling addiction. The judge's questions during my testimony indicated she understood the severity of what my family had attempted. Mr. Martinez, do you believe your family members understood they were making false claims when they filed their lawsuit? Yes, Your Honor. The evidence shows they knew there was no legitimate inheritance claim. They fabricated the entire story to steal my house and cover up their financial crimes. The trial continued for 6 days, with evidence presentations that methodically destroyed every aspect of my family's defense. Character witnesses testified about my work ethic and financial responsibility, while expert witnesses explained the sophisticated nature of the fraud conspiracy. Emma's criminal defense focused on portraying her gambling addiction as a mental health issue that diminished her responsibility for the fraud. The strategy failed when prosecutor Angela Davis presented evidence that Emma had been planning financial manipulation for months before executing her scheme. Addiction does not excuse criminal behavior, Prosecutor Davis argued during closing statements. The defendant made calculated decisions to defraud family members and file false legal claims. These were not impulsive actions driven by compulsion, but deliberate crimes planned and executed over an extended period. My parents' defense strategy involved claiming they had been manipulated by Emma and had genuinely believed her inheritance story. This approach also failed when the evidence showed Mom's direct involvement in stealing money from Grandpa Joe's accounts. Linda Martinez had power of attorney and fiduciary responsibility to protect her father's finances, Prosecutor Davis explained to the jury. Instead, she systematically looted his accounts to fund her daughter's gambling addiction. This was elder abuse in its most egregious form. The jury deliberations lasted less than 4 hours. Emma was convicted on all counts: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and elder abuse. My parents were convicted of elder financial abuse, conspiracy, and filing false legal claims. Judge Chen scheduled sentencing for the following month, but the civil aspects of our case were resolved immediately. The court finds that the original lawsuit filed by the defendants was completely without merit and constituted malicious prosecution, Judge Chen announced. Mr. Setter, 1. Martinez is entitled to full restitution for legal fees, punitive damages for emotional distress, and compensation for the defamation he has suffered. The financial judgment against my family totaled $187,000, money they could not possibly pay given their current financial situation. But the legal vindication was more important than monetary recovery. Marcus filed liens against any remaining family assets to secure eventual payment of the judgment. More importantly, the court issued a permanent injunction, preventing my family from making any future claims against my property. Your house is now completely protected from any family interference, Marcus explained after the hearing concluded. They can never again claim any interest in your property. The criminal sentencing hearing was scheduled for November 15th. Emma faced up to 5 years in state prison for her multiple felony convictions. My parents faced similar prison sentences for their role in the conspiracy, but the most important victory had already been achieved. My home was legally secure, my reputation was restored, and the family members who had tried to destroy my life were facing serious consequences for their actions. The nightmare was finally ending, and justice was about to be served. The sentencing hearing on November 15th drew a packed courtroom filled with family members, media representatives, and community members who had followed our case through months of coverage. Judge Barbara Chen entered the courtroom with a stack of documents that would determine my family's fate for years to come. Emma sat at the defendant's table in an Orange County Jail jumpsuit. Her appearance dramatically changed from the polished young woman who had filed the fraudulent lawsuit months earlier. Weeks in custody awaiting trial had stripped away the artificial confidence that gambling addiction had provided, leaving someone who finally seemed to understand the severity of her situation. My parents sat beside their attorney, holding hands for what might be the last time before prison sentences separated them. The financial stress and legal pressure had aged them visibly, transforming the successful middle-class couple I remembered into broken individuals facing the destruction of everything they had built. Judge Chen began the proceedings by reviewing the extensive evidence that had been presented during the trial phase. This case represents one of the most egregious examples of family financial fraud this court has encountered, Judge Chen announced to the packed courtroom. The defendants systematically abused a vulnerable elderly family member, fabricated legal documents, and filed fraudulent lawsuits to steal property from an innocent victim. Emma's attorney made a final plea for leniency based on her client's gambling addiction and alleged mental health issues. Your Honor, Ms. Martinez suffers from gambling addiction that impaired her judgment and decision-making ability, Carol Peterson argued. She has expressed genuine remorse for her actions and is committed to rehabilitation and restitution. Judge Chen's response was swift and unforgiving. Gambling addiction does not excuse elder abuse, document forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The defendant planned and executed sophisticated crimes over an extended period. Her actions were calculated, deliberate, and designed to steal her brother's life savings through deception and legal manipulation. Emma's sentence was harsh, but appropriate. 4 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was ordered to pay full restitution for the money stolen from Grandpa Joe's accounts and to undergo mandatory gambling addiction treatment during her incarceration. Miss Martinez, your gambling addiction may have motivated your crimes, but it does not diminish your responsibility for the harm you have caused, Judge Chen addressed Emma directly. You targeted vulnerable family members and attempted to steal your brother's home through elaborate fraud. Society must be protected from this type of predatory behavior. My parents' sentencing was equally severe. Mom received 3.5 years in prison for elder financial abuse and conspiracy, while Dad was sentenced to 3 years for his role in filing the fraudulent lawsuit and covering up the financial crimes. Robert and Linda Martinez held positions of trust and responsibility within their family, Judge Chen explained, during their sentencing. Instead of protecting a vulnerable elderly relative, they participated in systematic financial abuse and then attempted to cover their crimes through fraudulent legal action. This court cannot ignore such betrayal of family trust. The restitution orders were comprehensive and crushing. Emma was responsible for the $37,000 stolen from Grandpa Joe's accounts, plus interest and penalties. My parents were jointly responsible for my legal fees, which had exceeded $90,000, plus punitive damages for emotional distress and defamation. The total restitution amount is $243,000, Judge Chen announced. The defendants will remain financially obligated for these amounts regardless of their ability to pay. Liens have been placed on any current or future assets to secure eventual collection. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Chen addressed the broader implications of the case. This case serves as a warning to anyone who might consider exploiting elderly family members or filing fraudulent legal claims. Financial abuse of vulnerable adults is a serious crime that destroys families and violates the basic trust that holds our society together. This court will impose maximum penalties on anyone who preys upon elderly relatives for financial gain. The media coverage following the sentencing was extensive and largely favorable to my position. Local news stations featured segments about the importance of protecting elderly family members from financial abuse, using our case as an example of how quickly family disputes can escalate into serious criminal activity. The Arizona Republic published an editorial praising the court's harsh sentences and calling for stronger protections for elderly adults who might be vulnerable to financial exploitation by family members. The Martinez case demonstrates that family relationships do not excuse criminal behavior, the editorial stated. When adult children abuse their parents' trust for financial gain, the justice system must respond with appropriate severity. My workplace response was overwhelmingly supportive. My supervisor called me into his office the day after sentencing to discuss my future with the company. "Benny, we've watched you handle this situation with incredible integrity and professionalism," he said. "The way you stood up to family pressure and defended yourself through the legal system shows exactly the kind of character we value in our leadership team." The promotion to senior software engineer came with a 20% salary increase and expanded responsibilities that would accelerate my career development. More importantly, my colleagues' respect for how I had handled the family crisis opened doors for mentoring opportunities and project leadership roles. The financial recovery process began immediately after sentencing. Marcus Thompson worked with collection agencies to identify any remaining family assets that could be liquidated to satisfy the restitution orders. "Your parents' house will be sold at foreclosure auction, and the proceeds will be applied to your judgment," Marcus explained. "Emma has no significant assets, but her future earnings will be subject to garnishment until the debt is satisfied." The foreclosure sale of my childhood home was emotionally complex. Watching strangers tour the rooms where I had grown up, evaluating the property where my family had shared holidays and birthdays, felt like witnessing the complete destruction of my personal history. But the sale proceeds provided $47,000 toward the restitution I was owed, and the symbolism was important. My parents' house, purchased and maintained through legitimate work and responsible financial management, was being sacrificed to pay for their crimes against family members they should have protected. 6 months after sentencing, my life had stabilized into a new normal that was far better than anything I had experienced before the legal nightmare began. The court judgment had been satisfied partially. My legal fees were covered, and my house was permanently protected from any family interference. More importantly, the experience had connected me with Sarah Mitchell, a paralegal from Marcus Thompson's office who had worked extensively on my case. Our professional relationship had evolved into personal friendship during the long months of legal preparation, and that friendship was deepening into something more significant. Sarah understood the emotional complexity of family betrayal in ways that casual acquaintances could not. She had seen the evidence of what my relatives had attempted, witnessed my emotional reactions during the most difficult depositions, and supported me through the stress of public trial proceedings. "You handled an impossible situation with incredible grace," Sarah told me during dinner one evening in late spring. "A lot of people would have given up or made compromises that would have enabled your family's criminal behavior. You chose to fight for what was right, even when it meant destroying family relationships. Our relationship represented hope for building a new kind of family, one based on honesty, mutual respect, and shared values rather than manipulation and favoritism." The legal victory had restored my financial security, but Sarah's presence in my life was restoring my faith in the possibility of healthy family relationships. The sentencing phase of our legal case was complete, but the deeper work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. Justice had been served, but the more important victory was the opportunity to create a better future based on the lessons learned from family betrayal and the strength discovered through surviving it. 18 months after that devastating court document arrived at my office, I stood on the front porch of my craftsman bungalow watching Sarah plant roses in the garden we had designed together. The house that had once represented everything I could lose had become the foundation for everything I was building. The legal nightmare was completely resolved. Emma had served 14 months of her sentence and been released to a halfway house where she was required to attend daily gambling addiction counseling. The reports I received through the Victim Services Coordinator indicated she was making genuine progress in understanding how her addiction had destroyed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone who had tried to help her. My parents had been released after serving 26 months of their sentences. The experience of state prison had broken their pride and forced them to confront the choices that had led to their criminal behavior. They were living in a small apartment in Mesa, working to rebuild their lives from nothing and slowly earning the right to be part of my future. The first family dinner since their release had been awkward and emotionally charged, but it represented progress neither Sarah nor I had thought possible during the darkest days of the legal battle. "I need you to understand that we know what we did was unforgivable," Mom had said, sitting across from me at the small table in their modest apartment. "We chose to enable Emma's addiction instead of getting her the help she needed, and we decided to attack you instead of facing our own failures as parents." Dad's apology was shorter but equally significant. "Son, I failed you in every way a father can fail. I let Emma's problems become more important than your achievements, and I participated in criminal behavior rather than dealing with our family's real issues. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand the harm we caused." The financial restitution had been satisfied through the sale of their house and garnishment of their prison work earnings. More importantly, they had completed family financial counseling and were working with addiction specialists to understand how Emma's gambling problem had corrupted their decision-making processes. Emma's transformation had been the most dramatic and, initially, the hardest to trust. Her letters from prison had chronicled a painful process of accepting responsibility for the destruction she had caused. "Benny, I know that nothing I say can undo what I did to you," she had written in one of her first letters. "I stole from our grandfather while he was dying. I fabricated documents to steal your house, and I destroyed our family to feed my gambling addiction. I understand if you never want to see me again, but I need you to know that I finally understand how sick I became and how much damage I caused." Her release from prison had been contingent on completing an intensive gambling addiction treatment program and maintaining employment in a field that supported addiction recovery. She was now working as a counselor at a treatment center in Tucson, helping other gambling addicts understand the progression of their disease and the damage it caused to family relationships. The first meeting with Emma after her release had taken place at the treatment center where she worked, with Sarah present to provide emotional support if the encounter became overwhelming. "I want to show you what I'm doing with my life now," Emma had said, walking us through the facility where she counseled people whose stories mirrored her own journey from family manipulation to criminal behavior to recovery. "Every person I work with here has hurt family members the way I hurt you," she explained as we observed group therapy sessions and individual counseling meetings. "My job is helping them understand that gambling addiction doesn't excuse the choices we make, but recovery is possible if we're willing to do the work." Emma's transformation seemed genuine, but trust would require years of consistent behavior to rebuild. The important victory was that she was finally receiving appropriate treatment for her addiction and was using her experience to help others avoid the same destructive path. My career had flourished in the aftermath of the legal victory. The promotion to senior software engineer had led to opportunities for conference speaking and industry recognition. Companies throughout the Phoenix area had reached out with job offers that reflected both my technical skills and the integrity I had demonstrated during the family crisis. But the most significant career development came when Marcus Thompson approached me with a proposal for expanding his law practice. "I've been handling more family financial fraud cases since your story became public," Marcus explained during lunch at a downtown Phoenix restaurant. "There's clearly a need for specialized services that combine legal representation with forensic accounting and private investigation. I'd like you to consider joining my firm as a consultant on technology and financial analysis. The consulting arrangement allowed me to maintain my software engineering career while providing expertise to families facing situations similar to what I had experienced. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply satisfying, particularly when we could prevent elderly abuse or help honest family members defend against fraudulent claims. Sarah and I had been planning our wedding for the past 6 months, designing a ceremony that would celebrate not just our commitment to each other, but our shared values of honesty, integrity, and family responsibility. The guest list would include my parents and Emma, representing forgiveness and the possibility of redemption, alongside friends and colleagues who had supported us through the legal crisis. I want our wedding to be about building something new rather than just celebrating what we've survived, Sarah had said when we began planning the ceremony. We've both seen how badly family relationships can be damaged when people prioritize money over love, and I want our marriage to be an example of what's possible when people choose differently. The house had been transformed over the past 18 months into a space that reflected our shared vision for the future. The garden Sarah was tending would provide flowers for our wedding ceremony, which would take place in the backyard where I had once sat alone, wondering if I would lose everything I had worked to achieve. The financial recovery had exceeded our expectations. The court judgment had been satisfied completely. My legal fees were recovered with interest, and the equity in my house had increased substantially due to the neighborhood improvements we had made. More importantly, the experience of defending my financial security had taught me valuable lessons about asset protection and family financial planning that would benefit us throughout our marriage. The speaking engagements about elder abuse prevention had connected me with advocacy organizations throughout Arizona and beyond. The story of our family's legal battle had become a cautionary tale used in financial planning seminars and elder care training programs. Your case demonstrates how quickly family financial disputes can escalate into criminal activity, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a geriatric social worker who had invited me to speak at a conference in Denver. But it also shows that honest family members can successfully defend themselves against fraud if they're willing to seek appropriate help and stand up for what's right. The most meaningful recognition had come from the Arizona Attorney General's office, which had presented me with an award for advocacy in elder abuse prevention. The ceremony had been attended by my parents and Emma, all of whom had specifically requested permission to witness my recognition for the courage they had failed to demonstrate during their own crisis. As I watched Sarah work in our garden on this sunny Saturday afternoon, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The house I had nearly lost to family fraud had become the foundation for a new kind of family, one built on mutual respect and shared values rather than manipulation and favoritism. The financial security I had worked so hard to achieve was now protected by legal safeguards and enhanced by a career that combined technical expertise with advocacy for families facing similar challenges. The relationships that had been destroyed by addiction and criminal behavior were slowly being rebuilt on foundations of honesty and accountability. Most importantly, the experience of surviving family betrayal had taught me that justice and healing are both possible, even in the most devastating circumstances, if you're willing to fight for what's right and accept help from people who share your values. Sarah looked up from her garden work and smiled at me, dirt on her hands and happiness in her eyes. "The roses are going to be perfect for the wedding," she said. "Just like everything else we've built together. Our story had begun with betrayal and fraud, but it was ending with justice, love, and the promise of a family built on foundations that would never be shaken by greed or addiction. The house that my relatives had tried to steal had become the home where we would raise children who would learn the difference between love and manipulation, between family loyalty and enabling dysfunction. The legal victory had restored my financial security, but the real triumph was the life we were building on the ruins of the relationships that had nearly destroyed me. Sometimes the greatest gift family can give you is the motivation to create something better than what you inherited. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you financially? What would you do if your own parents sued you over property you had rightfully purchased with your own money? I'd love to hear your thoughts about family loyalty versus personal boundaries in situations like this. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it who might be facing similar family financial disputes. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about overcoming betrayal and building stronger relationships based on honesty and integrity. And please share this video with anyone who might benefit from learning about how to protect themselves from family financial fraud while still maintaining hope for eventual healing and reconciliation. Thanks for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you navigate whatever family challenges you might be facing with wisdom, courage, and the knowledge that justice and healing are always possible when you're willing to fight for what's right.